have to ask you, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And I said, well, I'm running as a Democrat. And she said, well, I can't vote for you because I'm pro-life. And I said, well, you know what? If I win, I'm still going to represent you. Do you mind if I look at some of your... She's an antique dealer. Mm-hmm. And so we had this conversation where she probably never voted for me, but she met a Democrat at the time who was kind. And I think that that's what we have to do. We have to show people that we can still respect each other.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Many of us think of Eagle River-Chugiak as a conservative stronghold where an independent, non-partisan candidate would never have a chance. However, the truth is, Eagle River-Chugiak, like most parts of Alaska, is a heterogeneous community with many different voices. Assembly candidate Gretchen Wehmhoff is counting on that diverse population taking a chance on her, a different sort of candidate. After 21 years as a teacher at Chugiak High, she officially retired but has continued part-time teaching, both within the school district and at UAA. In a somewhat unexpected turn of events, she became the co-publisher of the Skagway News, and out of necessity has turned into an expert on that Southeast community. In 2018, she was appointed to fill the seat left behind when Assemblymember Amy Demboski went to work in Governor Dunleavy's administration. This means that Gretchen knows what she's in for if she gets elected. Gretchen Wehmhoff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here.
So you are a lifelong Alaskan?
I came here in 1965, so I was 6 years old, and I started first grade at Willowcrest Elementary. So I've been here. It's my home. It's where I've been raised.
Gotcha. And you taught for 21 years at Chugiak High School.
Exactly. I taught for 2 years in Kenai. I was the drama teacher. Mm-hmm. And then I taught for a year at Diamond, and then 21 years out at Chugiak High as the journalism teacher and the debate coach.
And which makes sense because you were interested in journalism to begin with.
Yeah, it kind of worked out. I can be very honest in saying that just about all of my jobs follow the skills that I love.
Gotcha. And you didn't grow up in Chugiak-Eagle River area. You grew up in what we would call today Anchorage proper. What took you to Chugiak? What's your relationship like with that part of the municipality?
Well, when I did come to Anchorage, it was the greater Anchorage area borough that we lived in. And then, of course, I lived and worked in Anchorage. I started teaching in Chugiak in 1988. And in 1995, I got married, and my husband and I moved out to Chugiak, and he's from that area. Okay. And so that's what brought me out to Chugiak. So I've been out there since then.
Do you have kids?
I have a stepdaughter, but she died a year and a half ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it was unfortunate, and a reason for some of the things I'm going to do now in the future. But yeah, we lost her last December.
I'm so sorry.
We are very much involved with her children, and I'll tell you, I just, the more and more my husband spent time with them, the more and more we love them, we see her in them, we find joy in them.
Do they live here, obviously?
Yeah, our granddaughter lives with her father, and our grandson lives with his paternal grandmother. So that's been kind of hard on them. But we are the anchor between the two. And so we absolutely love our time with them. But so do I have children? Yes, I did have a child. And I did raise her. I helped raise her. Of course, when you have multiple families, everyone's raising her.
Right. I know that you still do some teaching, but when did you retire from Chugiak High School?
That's a really good point. Some people say, when did you retire? And I'm like, I've never really quit working. But I retired from teaching in 2009. Okay. And then I work part-time for the Anchorage School District. I did a .49 contract for a couple of years, but I work with a program that's kind of a blended learning situation with homeschool and in-class school. And now I specifically only teach online synchronous learning. In fact, everyone has to be in class on that. And that's how I teach my university classes now. I've been teaching for the university since '98, teaching communications classes. And so now everything I do is online, which really works with my lifestyle.
And at the university, you teach journalism?
I teach communications.
Okay.
So how to get along with people, public speaking, interpersonal communication, small group communication. That's one of my favorites.
You are, I'm going to say it wrong, publisher of the Skagway News?
Yeah, I am. I am co-publisher.
Co-publisher.
Yeah, I met a friend. I've been writing since I was little. I think I tried to make my own newspaper when I was a kid. When the community schools came out. When the community schools came out, I think I was 14, and I did the newsletter for our community school, and then I'd walk around and put it on everybody's door, and I used the mimeograph machine. And then I was in the junior high and high school newspaper. So I've just always enjoyed writing, and public relations, of course, requires you to do a lot of writing. But I started writing freelance for a few local papers out in Chugiak. And I met a woman named Melinda Munson, and she was writing as well. And we ended up doing our own little Alaska Family Fun page for a while. And she subbed for me a few times and then started teaching part-time at the same school I was at. Anyway, one day she sends me the Anchorage Daily News article talking about Larry Pursley giving away the paper. And she sends this to me and she says, "That's us." And I sit back, ha. And she cornered me one day, said, let's send a note to him. Let's send our letter to him. Okay, well, we did. And, I have a lot of skills in layout and design, and we both had printed works.
And you did the school newspaper. I mean, you were, you knew how to do this.
Exactly. In fact, one of my newspaper students jokingly said, "Oh, what do you know about newspapers?" But yeah, I put a paper out a month with kids, teenagers, herding them like kittens sometimes. And so I knew how to do it. Teaching the kids how to do things taught me how to do things. I'd worked with the Daily News for a little bit back in the 80s. And we sent that in, and pretty soon we were in kind of his top 3. And when we learned we were in his top 3, we thought, well, we better drive to Skagway. So we didn't even tell our boss. We just said, can we flex our days? And we got in the car on a Monday, drove to Whitehorse. And the next day we spent in Skagway, drove back to Whitehorse, and came back home. It's like 800 miles,
Yeah, it's far away. And had you been to Skagway before?
I had never been to Skagway before. And that was why it was important that we go. But that trip is what was the deciding factor for him, because he figured that we had taken that initiative to actually go see it. And she moved there. And she's got a large family. She has 7 children.
Did she move there because you got this paper?
Yes. She made the decision. I mean, that was a big decision for her to just pick up her family and go to Skagway. And that was the deal we had. I said, I will be there as often as I can, but I can't move there. And part of it was family issues, helping take care of my mother-in-law at the time. And then, of course, now I need to be here for my grandchildren. And so, but you know this, being your own journalist, is that you can do almost everything online.
Right.
So I design the paper, I do the business, I do all the work that doesn't necessarily require me to be there. And then, 4 times a year, I spend a lot of time down there.
So let's talk about Chugiak-Eagle River.
Yeah.
I've interviewed some people who grew up in Eagle River prior to the big earthquake of '64, when they felt that they were very far removed from Anchorage, that they were in a rural, separate community. Obviously, nowadays, it's part of the municipality. It feels more integrated, but it definitely has its own character.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk about the history of Eagle River-Chugiak and sort of bring us up to today and what your thoughts are?
Well, Chugiak-Eagle River has a lot of homesteading went on in different places. Out in Birchwood, there's a lot of family plots that those folks actually lived on Elmendorf. My in-laws, in fact, my husband's grandparents, they lived on Elmendorf out by Green Lake. And when Elmendorf, in fact, my husband's grandfather helped build the bases. He was a civil engineer, and he helped build both bases. And they when they moved people off of Elmendorf, they got them these 2.5 acre BLM lots out in Birchwood. And so that was an interesting thing. And then, of course, the Birchwood Airport became the extra airport, the emergency airport for the war, for everything. And as you know, Chugiak High School was built with a lot of community support. And, you know, it wasn't just built, it was built by community support. That was, of course, before unification. And Eklutna, who owns most of the land in the municipality privately, actually leases the land to the school district now for, you know, like, is it $1 or $10? And 4 schools out in Chugiak-Eagle River under that situation where the school district doesn't own the land, Eklutna does, but they lease it for $1 or $10, which says something.
That's so interesting. I'm going to just do full disclosure. This is all news for me. Oh. I will say that I fall into that category of I live in Anchorage and I look at Anchorage. So this is you are educating me, and I'm sure some of our listeners.
Well, I hope so. And so that relationship with Eklutna has been really important. And of course, we have people that live up Eklutna Valley, right next to the park, and we have, of course, Eklutna Village. And then Birchwood is mostly 2.5 acre properties. Water, most of our water in that area is well and septic, whereas parts of Eagle River are going to be on public water. And so that's been an issue. There's something in Title 21, which is land use in the codes, and there's a Chapter 10, and it's specifically for Chugiak-Eagle River in our code, and we call it our comprehensive plan. And oftentimes when things are happening in Anchorage, and not meaning in Anchorage, but in the government of Anchorage, something happens and that entity doesn't know about the comprehensive plan. Totally innocent, but I'd rather say ignorant, because they should know about it. And so just recently, a few years ago, there was a desire to put water lines through Birchwood. Well, water lines are one thing, but you know, when you put water lines through a neighborhood, you have assessments. So now you have people in Birchwood who are going to have $80,000 assessments on their property for water that they weren't going to be using in a place that our comprehensive plan says, no, we aren't going to have public water there. And so I actually was on the chair of a task force that dealt with that. And in the end, it all went away, but it was a case of a deal was made between 2 entities and no one talked to the property owners in the middle. And so things like that happen. And that's one of the things that I feel I bring to the table, is that I know this community and I understand that whether or not I personally agree isn't as important as following the rules that people have put down as preferences. And if we need to change things, then we need to review our comprehensive plan. Another thing about Chugiak-Eagle River, obviously, is it's growing. Mm-hmm. It is the place where there is land, and Eklutna has been very good about working for development. Of course, that water issue was a challenge for them because they needed water, public water, to build out into a more next to Powder Ridge. So that might have slowed things down, but they have been good with working with developers on that, trying to keep that rural lifestyle and still allowing for multifamily homes has been a challenge. That's one thing. When I first started teaching at Chugiak, I was single, and I thought about moving out there so I didn't have to drive. Mm-hmm. And it was very hard back then, in the late 80s, to try to find an apartment that I felt safe in, that had the type that I wanted to live in. And of course, I was still young. Well, I wasn't that young, but I had my life in Anchorage, and so that is something that they've been working on is regular homes, not $1 million homes, but let's try to get these middle of the road homes that people can afford. And I think there's some challenges, and I think there's some developers that are a little bit frustrated at times with the comprehensive plan. Several times we've had to challenge it. Right now, water is another issue for fire. So the concept is Alaska Wastewater Utilities is building tanks so that it would have a reserve for water should there be fires. Chugiak, the Eagle River Valley, a lot of homes are on hillsides, and Eagle River Valley is an area that there's no egress. There's only one route out, and so there's challenges for fire there. But yeah, I think the other thing about Chugiak-Eagle River is there's newer people there that may not understand the history, and so that, I have a friend, she's 95, she taught out there, she homesteaded out there, and sometimes she gets really frustrated because she can't figure out why people don't understand. And but she's been around and she's seen it. So I think we have a lot of military families, which is good. Building Eagle River High School was interesting because Chugiak used to be the school. Everything happened around the high school. And so building the new school was so needed. Chugiak High, when I was teaching there, we had 15 portable classrooms. We were way over 2,000. And they tried to do reconstruction at one point. So having a second high school was very important. We had done such a good job managing that we couldn't manage anymore, and we really needed another high school. But now populations have changed. So as much as housing is an issue in the municipality of Anchorage, the educational population is different. Chugiak High is, I think it's less than 1,000 kids right now, which is, I've never seen it that small.
How big was it at its biggest before Eagle River High was built?
2,200.
Wow. So less than half.
Yeah, I watched it. When I got there, there were about 1,100 kids, and I just watched it grow. There was a time where, you used to know all the kids because somehow or other they went through your classes or you saw them in the halls. And there was a time that I didn't know all the kids.
Right.
It was pretty crazy.
So this is a very basic question, but we keep saying Chugiak-Eagle River, and you've mentioned the Klutna, but also Peters Creek. How far up does it go? Does Mirror Lake where does the municipality stop?
Here's an interesting point. Before unification, the municipality went all the way out Knik River Road.
Okay.
And so if you're buying property out in Wasilla, the Knik River, Palmer area, the Knik River Road, you actually have to find the documents into the Anchorage area. Which is interesting.
That is very interesting. That's way out there.
Yeah, it is. But right now it ends right about where, it goes into the mountains, of course. There's a lot of moose that live in Anchorage.
Right.
But it goes just about to where the turnoff is, where you can choose the Old Palmer Highway or to go up the Glen.
Okay.
So it goes all the way out to there.
How did you get involved in politics?
Well, I've always been interested, but my brother-in-law was a representative in my area, and I wasn't going to run against a family member. And as soon as he decided to run for Senate, I decided to run for State House. And so that was my first...
What year was that?
That was 2014.
Okay.
And boy, that was so different than what I anticipated. I grew up with a mother who was a Democrat and a father who was a Republican. And our yard had both signs in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was so cool. You'd come down the road and you'd see everybody in our yard because... And they would always vote together. And I remember one time my dad was like, I don't know, I just am tired. I don't want to go out to vote. And my mom started putting her coat on. And he says, well, where are you going? She goes, well, if you're not voting, I definitely am. Because they used to cancel vote. So he would go. But they were power voters. And they were involved in politics. But here's what was different. It didn't matter the party. They had friends everywhere. We would have people over... They would joke about it. Oh, you silly Republicans! I mean, they were jokes. They were meaning jokes in a good way. It was fun. It was. They didn't identify so badly that they wouldn't be friends. And that's what I thought I was walking into, and that was quite different. It was not what I anticipated.
Did you run as nonpartisan?
No, that's where it got me the most. I've been nonpartisan since I registered.
Okay.
I mean, when you're 18 and your mom's a Democrat and your dad's a Republican, what do? Come home for dinner, they're both waiting to hear, and I'm like, I just couldn't choose, so I went independent, and back then independent was nonpartisan. But I decided to run as a Democrat. I needed help. I didn't know how to run.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand politics. And when I looked at the two parties at the time, I think it would have been tough 20, 30 years ago for me to decide. But I was definitely leaning more Democrat.
What were the specific issues that caused you to lean more Democrat?
Well, obviously, I'm strongly in favor of women's reproductive rights. That's a big deal for me. I totally believe that we should take care of people who need taking, that are weaker, or they're less able, or they don't have the tools. We should watch out for them. And I also believe in working together. And I just felt that those were angles that I think those are the two biggest ones, is caring about people, social programs.
For like the homeless, for disability rights,
for all of that.
Mm-hmm.
The poor, just the fact that so many things came from that Democratic Party. I mean, Social Security,
mm-hmm.
and Medicare. What makes me more to the middle
mm-hmm.
is that I'm very much in sync with, if there's a rule that the people of that area have created, whether it's a law or a comprehensive plan, an ordinance, a norm, we have to honor that. And so making a change or bending that rule starts kind of a domino effect. And so if a rule needs to be changed, then let's work together to change the rule rather than bend the rules. That
mm-hmm.
I think it's.
So you're a rule follower.
I'm a rule follower, and if the rule's not a good rule, I'm a rule changer.
What are some specific rules that you think need changing?
Well, I think we have some issues out in Chugiak-Eagle River and Anchorage involving our permitting process for building homes. And that's a big deal out in Chugiak-Eagle River, because there are developers and builders that are like, you know what, we like it the way it is. There's not as much bureaucracy. And if we have to follow the rules that are in the Anchorage Bowl, then it's going to cost us thousands of dollars.
And are we talking about code, like earthquake code?
Mostly earthquake code is not the issue as much as having the inspectors check the homes and the plans. In Anchorage, you actually have to have an inspector from the
mm-hmm.
municipality deal
mm-hmm.
with it. And out there, it just needs to be an inspector. And so there's been some places have made suggestions that even just putting a checkbox saying, I have viewed the actual blueprint, and that was what was happening. Some plans of homes were drawn on napkins. And so the inspector never really got to see what was planned to what was there. And so there's a little bit, and we saw that in the earthquake. We saw certain parts of Anchorage that, Anchorage, I've always been proud of Anchorage area, and I mean Chugiak, I mean the whole place, because of our earthquake mitigation and what we chose to do after the 64 earthquake. We have made code and rules that may seem large and heavy and cumbersome, but you know what? We didn't have a lot of buildings fall down, and that mm-hmm. was a pretty big earthquake. And so, and we have some tall buildings, and they were built for earthquakes. My home, I watched it twist and turn in that earthquake, but you know what? It did not fall down, and because it was built in a good place, and it was built for earthquakes. So I think that we have done some great things, but I think that's a big issue with Chugiak-Eagle River, and it's a mixed thing in the Eagle River area, because like I said, there are builders and developers that, hey, that's going to cost us a lot of money. And then on the other hand, there's folks saying, but we need to worry about safety. We have code on how tall buildings can go. We have concerns about when you're building on a slope. And there's lots of slopes out there. So I think that is a challenge right now that is going on, the challenge of money versus safety. And I think sometimes things do cost more than they should.
So I got a couple of things to say. Number one, it sounds like you would like to add some of the requirements that are present in Anchorage to the Eagle River-Chugiak area as far as with regards to homes.
But I'd like to do it with the people of Chugiak-Eagle River. You know what I mean? I don't want to say, hey, guys, we're going to do this to you. It's got to be part of their comprehensive plan.
So I was trying to make the segue to talk about Eagle Exit. So it sounds like instead of Eagle Exit, instead of saying we're going to pull away and do it our own way, you're saying, actually, there are some things happening in Anchorage that are good. That we could benefit from if we implemented them here. Exactly.
And I need to say this too, it is so easy for people to forget Chugiak-Eagle River is part of Anchorage. And you know, I'm from Anchorage, and when I first went out there, you know, it was kind of, oh, you're from Anchorage. And it was joking, you know, it was fun, it was playful. But as now having been out there, you know, I see it from a different way. I remember I have friends in Anchorage that they'll say, well, we'll have to plan a trip out to Eagle River. I want to separate Eagle Exit from the concept of separating Chugiak-Eagle River from the municipality. I think it's two different things.
Okay, well, teach me the difference.
Okay. The Eagle Exit is a small group of people that have called themselves Eagle Exit. They post signs around saying Eagle Exit, and they are what people hear. But it's a small group. It is not a large group. They've had trouble funding. They have every right, by all means, to explore this, and they're trying to educate people on what they're thinking. But they're short on funding and they're short on numbers, and so meaning numbers like information. There's really not enough data coming from them to make anyone really say, well, okay, that's a great idea. But that's who they are. So it's a group. So and I think what's happened here is that many folks have assumed that Eagle Exit is what Chugiak-Eagle River wants, and that's not the case. Chugiak-Eagle River may consider a separation, but the community and Anchorage, they need more information. I mean, it is not as simple as it was back at unification. Right now, we are so integrated. Our schools are integrated. Our public safety is integrated. Our housing rules are integrated. I mean, so much is integrated that separating from the municipality is it's a big deal. I believe that the people out in Chugiak-Eagle River are totally capable of making really good decisions when they have good information. And they don't have good information now. That no one has presented them with anything that says, this is how it would work, this is what it would cost. And until that happens, I think the discussion needs to just wait until those things happen. And I think that it has caused a PR problem for Chugiak-Eagle River. And that and our current assembly member that's still in has not really helped our PR situation.
So speaking of the assembly, you served on the assembly, which is, I mean, so let's talk about that. So you replaced Amy Demboski when she went to work for Governor Dunleavy.
Exactly. And it was, oh man, that was exciting. I was getting ready to run for assembly, and that happened. And there were 12 of us, really great people too, I should say. There were a lot of people who were very involved in the community that we all sat there in front of the assembly and answered questions. And I had a lot of experience because of that water issue and because of the experience I had working out there in Chugiak-Eagle River as a volunteer. And so I think I was able to put that out there. But there was one question. There were two questions that I had to get through. One is there was someone suggested that, well, you know, you work for the school district, you can't do that. But in the city code, it says that being an employee of the Anchorage School District does not keep you off the assembly. So you can't be on the school board, but, you know, I was a teacher at the time, part-time. Right. And so we took care of that. That one almost got me, but I had to show them the paperwork. And the other one was one of the assembly members said they were going to prefer someone who did not run. So I had to make a choice. Do I want to take a chance at being selected, or do I want to run? And I knew that my chances of actually being on the assembly, getting that experience, serving my community, was better at being appointed than it was at running. Mm-hmm. And so I committed at that time. And a lot of people later said, why'd you do that? And I said, you know what? I had to make a choice. It wasn't legal. No one could say you can't run.
And
but once I made that promise, I couldn't run.
And that was the race was that when Crystal Kennedy was being elected?
Yes, Crystal Kennedy ran. And so I made a commitment, and I was selected. And I'll tell you, that was a crazy time for me personally. I think both my husband and my daughter ended up in the hospital, and I was teaching, and everything was happening. But I felt the most empowered to help not only Chugiak-Eagle River, but Anchorage. I just felt that job, you're in it, you're in the community, you're not out there making huge laws, you're helping neighborhoods maneuver policies and bureaucracy, and you're helping make decisions that are going to help the people of Anchorage. And I absolutely loved it. That was amazing 4 months of my life.
Was there anything about it that surprised you?
Yeah. I got caught by surprise on one public testimony that there's something I had put forward, Susanna France and I had put forward, and some man just started yelling. And now I would have just calmly let him yell, until it was over. But I just was like, whoa, what just happened? And that surprised me. And I turned to Chris Constant and I said, how do I make it stop? So anyway, Chris was great because, you don't know a lot of procedures. When you get elected to the assembly, you go through a training period where they teach you how everything works. I didn't get that. I was like, that was a fire hose situation. Right. And I was, Fred Dyson was on one side of me and Chris was on the other, which I really appreciated that because that was such a diverse group of people that got along so well. There's respect in that, and yet they're so different. That's the other thing I like about assembly is there's no caucuses. Mm-hmm. You can't get 3 or 4 of you together and have a meeting. But they were so helpful. John Weddleton sent me an email saying, "Hey, here's some things I learned that might be helpful." And so, do
you remember what any of that advice was?
Some of them he sent me some resources. Like this is a place. He sent me some a list of Robert's rules that were used most often. Mm-hmm. I think those were probably the best. He sent me some resources and just a word of encouragement, welcome to the assembly type thing. So I just loved how that group worked. And I think sometimes people don't see that. And I know right now the assembly has this majority minority. And even when someone listed me in a news article and they listed me as a progressive. And in many ways I am, if fighting for women's reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights, and if that's progressive, but I think that should be the norm. Mm-hmm. I think that should be the norm. So I consider myself more moderate. But you don't get a choice. You're either conservative or progressive, Republican or Democrat, and so you get labeled pretty quickly. And I like to see myself as a moderate to the left type person. And because I think we're all people on this planet and that we have to work and we have to get along. And, I've studied communication. I teach communication, and I do have a skill of working with people, even people who may not initially want to work with me.
So if you are elected,
yes,
the other assembly member from Eagle River would be someone who is not described as a moderate, and that would be Assembly Member Jamie Allard.
Right.
So do you have areas of commonality with her?
I think we're both passionate. I think we're both passionate about what we believe in. I believe that we could both be respectful to each other. In relation, there's a way of looking at it, but I definitely think that we will Well, let's put it this way. If I'm on the assembly with Jamie, I will do my best to establish a relationship with her, because you have to. If you want to get business done, you have to have relationships. And the first thing you do to kill a relationship is criticize it, or say bad things about it, or etc. So the number one thing you have to do is you have to start a relationship, and relationships require trust, and trust requires disclosure and proof. And so, of course, this is a teacher coming out of me, but those relationships are the way we're going to get through this. Right now, we avoid relationships. Something comes up, we delete it off a Facebook page because we don't want anyone to put it on our page, or, well, I don't want to talk to those people, so we're not going to talk to those people. And I learned quickly, when I ran for House, I was running for a seat. I joked that it was kind of an armpit seat because it went around Knik Arm, but it was mostly the valley, and a third was Chugiak. So I was out there, and I was really, well, when I was the only Democrat, that would go to all of the forums. Some folks chose that, well, they're all going to be different. It's going to be audience, and I see that as a challenge and an opportunity, because if you don't show up where people don't expect you, they'll never learn about who you are and what possibilities there are. And I felt that way about knocking doors. I was knocking on a door once out in Wasilla, and I was interested. This woman had some real cool stuff outside her door, and we talked for a while. And then she says, I have to ask you, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And I said, well, I'm running as a Democrat. And she said, well, I can't vote for you because I'm pro-life. And I said, well, you know what? If I win, I'm still going to represent you. Do you mind if I look at some of she's an antique dealer. And so we had this conversation where she probably never voted for me, but she met a Democrat at the time who was kind. And I think that that's what we have to do. We have to show people that we can still respect each other. And I know that's very cliche, but it's so important. And so going to places that you are not comfortable is imperative. And I learned more by being the only progressive, liberal, Democrat, whatever you want to label me that day, going to those forums, knowing that my answer was specifically different than all the other 10 people in the room. But it got to a point that we could be humorous about it. I remember one time everyone's down the road, and I grabbed the mic and I said, well, you know what I'm going to say. And people laughed because we now had a rapport. Sure, we're not going to vote for her, but she's okay. And I think that is a super big stepping stone. And I think that's why and where I can help on the assembly is that, Amy and I have a relationship. I don't know that it's face to face. It's always been good. Once we turn our faces away, it's probably not. But I think that that when Amy was on the assembly, I do believe she truly cared for Chugiak-Eagle River.
Well, when Amy was on the assembly, she had a very close working relationship with Christopher Constant.
She did. That assembly with Fred and Amy, or even Bill Starr for a while, that was an assembly that was the same shape. It had two more conservatives and more that were not. Well, there are a few more moderates in there at the time, but they had a good working relationship. And I never heard anyone on the assembly say a bad word about Amy. They would comment after she was gone, well, whoa, who's going to fill her shoes on this? Because she was a good numbers person. And I'll tell you, she did her homework. There are a couple times that we learned about things because she came out there and said this. And I will tell, and Amy, I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but one day she was out, I was at a Chugiak Community Council meeting, and she was showing people how the plan was to build an entrance every quarter mile to the park so that there'd always be an entrance. Well, that really affects people who lived on Hillside and Chugiak because they're backed up to the park. They may have property that they may want to split later for their children, and this was going to impact that. So it was really good that she saw that. And I said, man, how did you catch that? And she looks at me straight in the eye and she goes, trust no one. I'll never forget that. But in a way, as much as I'm a person who insists on trusting, I think it's always good to continue to ask questions. So when you get that gut feeling that says, oh, it doesn't feel right, are they cheating on me? I think it's better to say, why do I feel this way? Let me start asking questions, because questions will get you there. And maybe it's the journalist in me, maybe it's the debater in me, but the point is, asking questions is far better than making a judgment. And so I don't like to say they're not telling the truth, but quite frankly, it happens a lot.
I want to talk a little bit about your specific assembly race. There's something unusual that happened, which is, and you'll have to educate me a little bit, Crystal Kennedy endorsed someone that was not the Republican Party's favorite. And so there's actually been a little bit of turmoil. Can you talk a little bit about your current assembly race?
Yes, I can. There was a woman, a really amazing woman who actually used to be a student of mine at Chugiak High School, Tiffany Lund. And I hope she continues. But what I think we saw is that she was someone who cared and grew up in Chugiak-Eagle River. But she was new to politics, and she has children. She has a lot going on. But what she has going on is she was very passionate. She's a good speaker. She's very involved in the community. And I was supporting her. She, for personal reasons, decided.
And Crystal endorsed her.
And Crystal did endorse her. Crystal did, yes. And several conservatives out in the area did as well. I know for a fact that both the mayor and Jamie contacted her, and she wasn't interested in their angle. And that caused them, of course, to get someone to run in the other world. I'm not so sure.
Kevin Cross?
Yeah, Kevin Cross. And I'm not so sure if it was a Republican thing, because she's a registered Republican, and it's a nonpartisan race. But that particular group of people, the mayor and Jamie, really got behind Kevin. And for some reason, and I don't blame her. I do not blame her. But she had to make some personal decisions, and one of them was that, this is not the year for her. And I hope she comes back, because I think she'll be fantastic. But there we were, with a man who's only lived in Eagle River for 18 months. 18 months, which means he knows very little about what I just told you. Mm-hmm. And he could walk right into that assembly seat. And I couldn't let that happen. And I put my name in. I mean, I have experience. I'm not afraid of being who I am and talking. I know Eagle River and Chugiak. And I think this time the support's going to be different, because I know there are a lot of people in Chugiak-Eagle River who are not supporting him. And the sad thing is, but it's real, is there are some folks that, hey, Gretchen, I can't endorse you. I can't give you money because that shows up publicly. But I'm voting for you and I'm talking for you, And so in a way that's good, but in a way it's sad that people feel they can't openly discuss who they're voting for. And that is something that was not the case when I was growing up with my parents. That things were all out in the open for discussion. And here you can lose a seat, you can be disowned by a party,
Right.
Well, crazy stuff.
And the thing that's unfortunate is if, let's say you've got a sizable percentage of people who are willing to vote for you mm-hmm. on that mail-in ballot in the privacy of their own homes and not tell anybody about it, then when the results come out, you're going to definitely have people out there who'll be like, no one even talked about her. How did this possibly happen?
Well, I will tell you, that's a really good point. That is a good point. And I think I'm going to give the people out there I'm going to say that they're smart enough to know. They're smart enough to know. They want dignity. They don't want craziness. They want someone to represent them, and they don't want someone to embarrass them. And I don't know anything personally about Kevin. I mean, he's probably a nice guy. I don't know. But politically, he's not the person that needs to represent Chugiak-Eagle River. We need someone who's from Chugiak-Eagle River, who understands it, and who can work together. And right now, I'm not hearing from that campaign that there's a willingness to work together. I have a master's degree in negotiation and dispute resolution. I really am into this communication stuff.
From a law school. I was going to ask you about that. I didn't even know what that meant.
Well, Creighton University, I picked my universities by rigor, I guess. But their School of Law really has been promoting alternative resolutions and dispute resolution and trying to get away from constant litigation in the world. And so they got a large grant, and they started this school within their law school specifically for negotiation and dispute resolution. It was an amazing experience. I don't think I've ever written more in my life than I wrote for that master's program. But what I learned was great, and what I learned was very affirming, that's where I belong. I belong in helping people communicate.
Well, Gretchen Wehmhoff, thank you so much for being on the podcast. If there was ever a time where we need some dispute resolution, it is now. So we wish you the best of luck, and thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful and it was fun.
Big thanks to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable. And thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe and recommend us to a friend. Reminder, we also host Zoom events. Please visit eastanchoragebbookclub.com for more information. Next week on the podcast, and I promise this time, we have anonymous blogger, The Blue Alaskan, and community organizer, Yarrow Silvers, discussing the private Facebook group, Save Anchorage. Please tune in.